He made one decision, helped his drunk boss get home safe when no one else would. He left a note. He documented everything. He did it all right. By morning, there was a police officer at his door and an immigration flag in a federal database that could put him on a plane and take him away from his son forever. And here's the part that will stay with you. He knew the risk before he made the choice. He made it anyway. Before we go further, drop your country in the comments. These stories travel further than you'd imagine, and we want to know where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. You won't want to miss where this one goes. Martin Novak checked his phone at 8:47 and typed the same message he typed every Friday night when work ran long. On my way soon. Save me some dinner. His son, Leo, 10 years old and already running the household like a small, serious general, would read it, roll his eyes, and put a plate in the microwave anyway. 11 years. That was how long Martin had been building something in a country that had never once made it easy. He had a work visa that required annual renewal, a job that required annual performance reviews, and a son who required a father who was still here, still present, still standing, still legal. He understood, in the way that only people who have seen the system up close truly understand, that for an immigrant in corporate America, there is no safety net. There is only the record you keep clean and the profile you keep low. Tonight was supposed to be straightforward. 45 minutes at the firm's quarterly celebration. Shake the right hands, say the right things, disappear. Then he saw Jennifer Hutchison, and everything changed. Martin had a system for surviving America, and like most systems built under pressure, it was held together less by confidence than by the daily discipline of not letting anything slip. So he woke at 5:40 every morning, made Leo's lunch before his own coffee, reviewed his work calendar for anything that might require him to speak in a meeting without being directly invited to do so, and drove Leo to school along the same route every day, because familiarity, in Martin's experience, produced fewer variables. Variables were the enemy. Variables were what had taken Amara. He didn't think her name on most days. Not because he had forgotten her. He could not have forgotten her any more than he could have forgotten how to breathe, but because thinking it directly led to the feeling, and the feeling led to the kind of distraction that a man in his position could not afford. So he kept her at the periphery, the way you keep a wound at the periphery, aware of it always, pressing on it never. She had been gone 3 years. Deportation, they called it. A paperwork discrepancy in a form filed 7 years earlier, surfaced by a routine audit, resolved by a government that did not consider the 10-year-old boy asleep upstairs to be a relevant factor in the resolution. Martin had hired 2 lawyers and spent $41,000 and watched his wife walk through a gate at O'Hare anyway. After that, the calculus of his life became very simple. Leo needed one parent on American soil. Which meant Martin needed to be the kind of man that no system, no audit, no flag, and no misunderstanding could touch. He kept his visa paperwork in a fireproof box. He kept his performance reviews laminated. He kept his head down, his record spotless, and his life so orderly and unremarkable that there would never be a reason for anyone to look closely enough to find something wrong. It was not a life of fear, exactly. He would not have called it that. It was a life of precision, of understanding the difference between the world as it was and the world as it pretended to be, and moving accordingly. Leo knew none of this. That was the point. That was the whole point. The party was on the 14th floor of a building that charged by the hour and served champagne in glasses too thin to hold without feeling self-conscious about it. Martin had arrived at 8:15, shaken 4 hands, accepted a drink he didn't finish, and positioned himself near the coat rack with the quiet intentionality of a man who had already identified the exit. He was ready to use it. Jennifer Hutchison had been standing near the window when he arrived, composed in the way she was always composed, posture straight, expression calibrated, the kind of professional stillness that made junior staff nervous and senior partners comfortable. He had nodded in her direction. She had nodded back. And that was the full extent of their social obligation to each other, and they both knew it. But that was 40 minutes ago. Now she was at the far end of the room, and the stillness was gone. Martin noticed it the way he noticed most things. Not all at once, but in accumulating details he couldn't stop himself from cataloging. The way her hand reached for the table edge a half-second before it needed to. The champagne glass held too close to the rim. The laugh that came out a beat late, pitched slightly wrong. The laugh of a person performing sobriety for an audience that had already stopped watching. And that was the part that settled in his chest like something cold. They had stopped watching, not because they hadn't noticed. He could see it in the careful angles of their bodies, the way conversations subtly repositioned themselves away from her corner of the room. They had noticed, and they had made the quiet, collective calculation that noticing further was not in their interest. Directors of sales had deniability to protect. Junior architects had promotions to consider. The caterer had a policy. Everyone had a reason that was easier than the alternative. Martin stood at the coat rack with his jacket on and his keys already in his hand. He was 90 seconds from the elevator. Leo would be asleep by the time he got home, but the microwave plate would be waiting. And that small, faithful gesture was enough to move toward. He watched Jennifer reach for another glass. He watched her miss it. He watched every person in the room find somewhere else to look. And he stayed where he was. He made it to the elevator. That part was important, because it meant the decision wasn't made in a moment of unthinking impulse. It was made after he had pressed the button, after the doors had opened, and after he had stepped inside and watched the 14th floor disappear behind brushed steel. He made it to the elevator, and then he stood there while the doors closed, and he thought. He thought about the HR coordinator who had processed his last visa renewal and taken 4 months instead of 6 weeks, and never offered an explanation. When he thought about the performance review 2 years ago, where his director had described his work as solid but understated, which was the corporate vocabulary for invisible in a way that wasn't quite useful enough. He thought about Amara walking through the gate at O'Hare, and the particular quality of her expression in that last moment. Not devastated, not angry, just careful. The way she had learned to be careful. The way she had taught him to be careful. The way careful people get when they finally understand that careful was never going to be enough. He thought about what it would mean, specifically, procedurally, legally, for a black immigrant man on a renewable work visa to be found alone with his drunk white female supervisor somewhere private. He did not need to imagine worst-case scenarios. He had lived adjacent to enough of them to know they did not require malice to activate. They only required misunderstanding, and misunderstanding required almost nothing at all. The elevator doors opened on the lobby. Martin did not move. He stood there while a couple stepped around him with mild irritation, while the doors closed again, while the car hummed and waited. He thought about Leo, who would be asleep by now with his microwave plate untouched, because the boy always forgot to eat when his father wasn't home to sit across from him. He thought about the kind of man Leo was, quietly, and had constantly watching him become. Then he pressed 14. Not because he had resolved the fear. The fear was still there, precise and well-reasoned and entirely justified. He pressed the button because he had decided, at some point between the lobby and the 14th floor, that he was done letting the fear make decisions his conscience wouldn't. He stepped out of the elevator. Jennifer was still at the table, still alone. He walked toward her. Jennifer's address was in her employee file. But Martin knew this because he had thought to check it on his phone in the elevator on the way down, which told him something about the state of his mind, that even in the act of helping, he was already thinking about documentation. She lived 12 minutes away. She did not speak during the drive. She was conscious, or close enough to it, her head resting against the window, her breathing slow and irregular. Once, somewhere on Meridian Street, it was quiet when they arrived. He had texted was quiet when they arrived. He had texted the neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, from the parking garage before they left, "Leo, okay? Just running late." And she had replied with a thumbs up, which meant Leo was asleep and the alarm was set, and the world, in that small domestic corner, was still intact. He guided Jennifer inside with a hand at her elbow. Nothing more. He kept the lights low. He settled her on the couch, removed her shoes, one careful hand on the ankle, nothing else, and retrieved a blanket from the hall closet. He found a clean shirt and a pair of sweatpants and left them folded on the armchair within her reach. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and wrote the note. He wrote it on a sheet of Leo's homework paper because it was the first thing he found, and as he wrote, he was aware of the strange intimacy of the act, a man explaining his own goodness to a stranger who would have to decide whether to believe it. He wrote his name, he wrote the address, he wrote what had happened in plain sequential sentences, the way a person writes something they expect to be read by someone other than its intended recipient. He photographed the note with his phone before he placed it on the coffee table. Then he photographed it on the table. Then he photographed the room, the folded clothes, the water glass, the aspirin, the blanket. He did it quickly and without ceremony, the way you do something you are not proud of needing to do. He turned off the kitchen light and lay down on the couch with his shoes still on. He did not sleep. Leo found her first. This was almost inevitable, because Leo woke at 6:15 every morning with the unsettling precision of a child who had never once required an alarm. And because the path from his bedroom to the kitchen took him directly past the living room doorway, and because Leo, unlike his father, had not yet learned to look away from things that surprised him. Martin heard the footsteps, then the pause, then the particular quality of silence that meant his son had stopped moving and was thinking about something. He was off the couch before the silence could develop further, shoes still on, shirt wrinkled, moving toward the hallway. He was too slow. "Is that my dad's work shirt?" Leo asked, his voice carrying the frank, unfiltered curiosity of someone who had not yet learned that some questions are better held internally. Martin came around the corner and stopped. Jennifer was standing in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing his shirt, the gray one, oversized on her, falling to mid-thigh, and she had one hand braced against the doorframe in a way that suggested the room had not yet fully settled around her. Her hair was disordered. Her face was pale, except for 2 points of color high on her cheeks, and her eyes, when they found Martin, held an expression he had no precise word for, not quite fear, not quite accusation, but something that contained the seeds of both, the expression of a person whose mind was working very fast through a very incomplete set of information. Martin looked back at her with the coffee mug in his hand and felt the specific, crystalline stillness of a man who understands that the next 60 seconds will matter more than he can afford to calculate. "This is my dad's co-worker," Leo announced to no one in particular, apparently satisfied with his own conclusion. "Are you sick?" "You look like how I look when I have a fever." Jennifer's gaze moved from Martin to Leo and back again. Something shifted in her face, the rapid internal arithmetic of a woman recalibrating, though Martin couldn't yet tell toward what. "Leo," Martin said, his voice even, careful, the voice he used when evenness and care were the only tools he had left. "Go get your backpack ready." Leo considered this for a moment, then disappeared down the hallway. The kitchen was very quiet. Jennifer found her phone on the coffee table next to the note. She picked up the phone first. This was understandable. This was what anyone would do. And Martin, who was still standing in the kitchen doorway, he told himself that as he watched her thumb unlock the screen, that this was normal, that she was disoriented and frightened and reaching for the thing that felt most like control. He told himself he should say something, explain. Walk her through the note, through the night, through the simple and entirely innocent sequence of events that had brought them both to this Saturday morning. He didn't move fast enough. She had the phone to her ear before he reached the living room threshold. "Dana." Her voice was low, compressed, the voice of someone trying to keep their words inside a very small space. "Dana, I need you to listen to me. I woke up, and I'm not at home. I don't know. I'm at someone's house. I don't remember how I got here." Martin stopped where he was. He heard the note in her voice. Not malice, he was certain of that. Not malice, but fear. The raw and disorganized fear of a woman who had woken up with missing hours in a stranger's shirt. And he understood it even as he felt the floor begin to tilt beneath him. He heard Dana's response only as register, not words. Sharp, immediate. The register of a person shifting into action before they have finished processing information. "His name is Martin," Jennifer said. "He works with me." Dana, I don't know what." Dana had already made the call by the time Jennifer finished the sentence. Martin learned this later, from the officer who arrived 17 minutes after that, who was professional and calm and writing things down on a small notepad while Leo stood in the hallway in his school uniform and watched with serious, quiet eyes. The HR flag was generated automatically, cross-referenced from the wellness check report. This was standard protocol. No one decided it. A field was populated. A system ran its logic. And somewhere in a database Martin had never seen, his name appeared next to a classification that had nothing to do with who he was and everything to do with what he looked like on paper. 40 minutes. That was all it took. No villain, no conspiracy. Just a system doing precisely what it was designed to do. The officers left at 8:43. Martin stood at the front window and watched the patrol car pull away from the curb, and then he stood there a moment longer, watching the empty street. And then he turned around and told Leo that everything was fine, and that he should eat his eggs before they got cold. Leo sat down at the table with the careful, deliberate obedience of a child who understood that some moments required him to be very easy to manage. He picked up his fork. He did not ask questions. He was, in this as in many things, his mother's son. Martin's phone buzzed at 8:51. He looked at the screen. His immigration attorney. Not a call, a text. Which meant it was either very routine or the opposite of that. And given the morning he had already had, he understood immediately which one it was. He told Leo he would be right back. He walked down the hall. He went into the bathroom and locked the door behind him, which he had not done since Leo was small enough to require supervision. And in the locked bathroom he sat down on the edge of the tub and read the message. It was 3 sentences. Elon Martin, a flag was generated on your file this morning through a federal contractor database, linked to a police wellness check at your address. I'm filing an emergency response, but I need you to call me as soon as you can. He read it twice. Then a third time, in case the words rearranged themselves into something that meant less than they appeared to mean. They did not. He sat in the bathroom of the home he had rented for 6 years, in the country he had given 11 years of his life to, and he thought about Amara. He thought about the way the system had moved then, not violently, not cruelly, just efficiently, with the impersonal momentum of a thing that did not know his name or his son's name or what any of it had cost. He thought about how fast 48 hours could pass when you were on the wrong side of a process. 12 feet away, his son was eating breakfast. Martin pressed his palms flat against his knees and sat very still and breathed. Then he unlocked the door and went back to the kitchen. The suspension letter had arrived by email on Sunday morning, which Martin thought said something about the era they lived in, that HR could dismantle a man's professional life on a weekend without anyone having to come into the office to do it. He had read it at the kitchen table while Leo was at Mrs. Okafor's, then closed his laptop and sat with the silence for a long time. Jennifer's email came Monday afternoon. Now, 4 words and a time. Can we talk? Tuesday. No question mark, which meant it wasn't really a question, and Martin, who had nothing left to protect by refusing, replied with a single word and showed up at 9 o'clock to a building he had been formally asked not to enter. Her office was on the 3rd floor. She was standing when he came in, which he hadn't expected, and she closed the door behind him without calling her assistant, which he also hadn't expected. The room was quiet. On the desk between them, smoothed flat as though she had been pressing the creases out of it with her hands, was the note, his handwriting, Leo's homework paper. She didn't offer him a seat. She didn't apologize. Not yet. She just looked at him the way people look at something they have been trying to understand for 2 days without success. Why didn't you just leave me there? Martin looked at the note on the desk, then at the window, then at her. He spoke for less than 2 minutes. Yeah, he told her about Leo. He told her briefly and without performance about Amara. Not all of it, just enough. Just the gate at O'Hare and the 48 hours and the boy who had not had a mother since he was 7 years old. He told her that he had known, at the elevator, exactly what helping her could cost him. He told her he had gone back anyway, because his son was going to grow up watching him, and he had decided a long time ago that what Leo watched would be worth watching. When he finished, the room was very still. Jennifer looked at the note for a moment longer. Then she reached across the desk and picked up her phone. She called the HR director first, then the senior partner, then her attorney. She did not ask Martin to leave while she made the calls. The immigration flag was cleared on a Wednesday, 10 days after Jennifer made the calls. Martin's attorney delivered the news by phone in the same clipped, professional tone she used for everything, which Martin had come to understand was not coldness, but the practiced steadiness of a woman who had learned not to celebrate until the paperwork was finalized. He thanked her. He hung up. He sat at his desk in the spare bedroom he used as a home office and did not move for several minutes. He went back to work the following Monday. His desk was as he had left it. No one said anything about where he had been, which was either courtesy or cowardice. And Martin had lived long enough in this country to know those two things were frequently indistinguishable. Jennifer passed him in the hallway on his 3rd day back. She met his eyes and nodded, the same nod as always, measured, professional, the full extent of their social contract. He nodded back. That was all. It was, he was surprised to find, enough. He didn't know about the email until 6 weeks later. So when HR called him in to discuss a reclassification of his position, a restructuring, they called it, an elevation of his project coordinator role to senior project director, a title change that carried with it a visa classification upgrade, and, attached to that upgrade, eligibility for permanent residency. He sat across from the HR director and listened to the language of bureaucracy delivering the best news of his adult life, and when he asked, carefully, how the reclassification had been initiated, the director glanced at her screen and said simply that it had come as a recommendation from the third floor. He did not go up to the third floor. He thought about it. He decided the nod in the hallway had already said everything that needed saying between them. That evening, Leo had a school assignment on the kitchen table, a single-lined page with the words, "What does it mean to be brave?" printed at the top in bold. "Give me an example," Leo said, a pencil ready, with the pragmatic efficiency of a boy who had homework and limited patience for philosophy. Martin looked at the page for a moment. "Brave," he said slowly, "is when you do the right thing even though you know exactly what it might cost you, and then you trust that it was worth it." Leo wrote it down without looking up. Martin watched his son's hand move across the page and said nothing else, because nothing else was needed. He was here. His son was watching. That was the whole story. That was enough.